Good afternoon and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Women's in African Power Increasing Connection series. My name is Ana Rojas, and it is my pleasure to be your moderator for today's webinar. I want to first, before we get started, I want to thank you, our participants, for tuning in at this time and so punctual today. And also to our amazing panelists who have accepted to be on board with us for sharing their own professional experience as well as their guidance in terms of developing one's career in the energy sector in sub-Saharan Africa. WiAP and its Increasing Connections webinar series is made possible thanks to the support of Power Africa, which, as you know, it's a U.S. government-led partnership coordinated by USAID. We're also very thankful for the opportunity that they provide us to be able to reach out to you. Before we get started today, I want to share with you a few of our virtual housekeeping matters. If this is not your first webinar with us, then you know by now that we do keep participants muted throughout the whole session just to avoid background noises and to make connectivity easy for everyone. However, this is absolutely not intended to be a way of stopping you from interacting. Quite the opposite. I would really like to encourage you to continuously use the chat function that you can find in this platform, which will be towards the top right end of your screen. And please do send your comments and particularly your questions to our panelists throughout this conversation. My colleague, Jamie Wen, who is supporting us with the back end, with the technical aspects of this webinar, is also going to be collecting your questions and comments, and she will be sharing them with me so that we can, throughout the conversation, share it also with our panelists. We are also making at least one handout available for you. Also using this chat function, which provides you a summary of what is that we're going to be discussing today in terms of what is understood as transitioning and also planning for your succession, identifying who could be your successor. And in case you need to step out or you want to listen in to this conversation later on, please rest assured that this webinar is being recorded and the presentations together with the handout and a series of exercises for practicing back home will be made available in due course. I would like now then to move into a little bit of what WiAP is. As you know, Women in African Power is a network. It's grown now to having more than 900 members in more than 20 African countries. And it convenes professionals from all different aspects of the energy level, from different backgrounds to women working in utilities, in energy finance, NGOs. We also have very senior members as well as students. So we're very glad to know that the network has been able to reach to a very large variety of women and men in the region and working in the region. And if you are not a member of the network yet, we would like to invite you to please reach out to Denise Mortimer at Power Africa at the email that you see below. And the reason for today's webinar, Transition into a New Position and Planning Your Succession, is part of the network's aim to sharing knowledge and building professional skills of women who are active in Africa's energy sector. And today's webinar is quite important to us, we'll say, because when we started developing the webinar series, they were meant to help network members both to increase their content knowledge as well as their soft skills development. And today's webinar is bringing us to a full circle in terms of exploring the career pathways of any person who's working in the energy sector or otherwise, where we started with identifying what is the brand that one presents, going through network, growing into leadership, and now we reach to that point in which at a career, one has to move into a different position and then start this whole brand again. So we're very happy to be able to come and discuss this topic of transitioning and succession with two amazing members of the network. First, we're going to hear from Bertas Lamili, who's president of African Women in Energy and Power. And afterwards, we're going to be listening to Eunice Berichum, who's the CEO of WiAP Energy Limited. And we're going to be doing this first by listening to them and their experiences, and then having this interview format, which I hope that you've gotten familiar with. And we're also going to invite for questions and answers from the audience. So again, please do not forget about using the chat function on your side. And before I give the word to Berta, who's going to be our first speaker today, I just want to remind you that when we're talking about transitioning, there is quite a lot of emphasis, not so much on the change, which is something that's external to us, but it's more about the psychological process that one is dealing with when moving from one situation to the other. Could be feelings of acceleration, also perhaps sometimes of regret, or of feeling bad for leaving colleagues behind. And that is a process that needs to be managed in order to be able to transition properly into a new position. But also, and perhaps most importantly, is also the issue of legacy and what it is that we are leaving behind, and how we may be in a position to ensure that through planning and strategizing, we can actually identify colleagues that we can help and develop, become leaders, and also grow into that position that we are leaving behind. So before going more into the topic through the experiences of our members, I want to ask Bertas Lamili to be prepared and invite her to take the floor to share both her experiences and insights with us. So Berta, if you're ready, perhaps I can invite you to unmute yourself.
Hi, Anna. I am ready, and I'm excited to be on this webinar to share insights and experiences about my journey, and hopefully this will help our listeners with their career journey as well. So I'm going to start with just introducing my career path. I began my career in 1997, and I started in marketing communications. And when I started, I really wanted a career in fashion, but my family at the time did not believe that fashion was business. So my alternative was to go into marketing. So I stayed in marketing from 1997 until 2006, occupying several roles from junior account manager all the way to head of corporate communications. In 2006, I founded my first company, which was a marketing communications consulting company called Rito Consulting Services. And we delivered marketing communications solutions for public and private sector companies between 2006 and 2012. At that point, we were headhunted by an engineering consulting firm, which in South Africa was looking for a partner to enable their transformation, introducing people of color into their business and into their leadership. And through that, I sold 50% of Rito Consulting into E.ON and transitioned into the energy sector. It was also at a point in my life that I had been in marketing communications in the creative space from 1997 until 2012, and I was quite ready to look at a technical field and to see what I can contribute. E.ON Consulting at the time was an engineering consulting firm that provided solutions across the value chain of energy generation through transmission to distribution and looking at the operations of a utility. I joined them as a partner in 2012, and 2014, I was appointed their managing director. We had 350 consultants at the time. It was quite an interesting period for me. The growth curve was quite steep. Not only had I changed the domain of expertise for myself, but I was also working with engineers who were highly qualified with master's and PhD degrees. And so it demanded a lot of my interpersonal competency and leadership competency more than my technical skills, because I came from a different background altogether. Nonetheless, as an entrepreneur, you learn to one, teach yourself a lot of things, two, to surround yourself with mentors and coaches that help you build up the competencies that are required for a role. During that time, I was appointed also to sit on the advisory board of PowerGen Africa and Africa Utility Week, directing content for those huge conferences on the continent on energy solutions and technology. I was also appointed a strategic advisor for the Association of Municipal Electricity Utilities in South Africa, helping the entity to build a Women in Electricity program. And it's during that time that I discovered a gap for youth in energy. At the conferences, you hardly see any youngsters presenting papers or participating as entrepreneurs. And so I founded Gen X Theatre, which is a youth in energy program that exposes and supports young professionals and students in energy. By 2016, we lost an incumbent customer at E.ON, and we went through a very tumultuous time. Losing an incumbent customer means you lose 94% of your revenue in a short space of 3 months. And so you have to innovate very quickly to help the company to survive. And so we also had a new executive committee, and I worked very hard with the team to diversify the company outside of its key client to look at other markets. By the end of 2016, I was totally worn out as their leader and having to go through the right sizing process of the organization, retrenchments, and facing people that had worked for the company for close to 15 years and telling them that they're losing their jobs and their families are losing income was a very painful, taxing emotionally and mentally process. At the end of that year, I felt it was time for change for the organization, and it was time for change for me as a person as well. And so I resigned from E.ON Consulting, and I took a sabbatical for 8 months to recuperate and to look into my soul again and to discover what it is that I want to do and what would give me joy, because I was quite bit from the experience that I had had. So I traveled Southeast Asia for 60 days, no conversation, just dancing. So I went salsa dancing, Miranga dancing, bachata dancing, and some kizomba, which was quite refreshing, and it was a healing process. I came back and I joined ABB, the Global Electrical Firm, and I headed up their Southern African utility segment, responsible for market development and business development. It was a shock in the system. I had never in my entire life worked for a global corporate with a senior portfolio. So there was a lot of learning again and a lot of adjustment. And therein I found my true purpose. I discovered that what I want to do is to work with programs that have a direct social impact. And so I founded African Women in Energy and Power to support women entrepreneurs in energy. And at the same, during the same year, beginning of 2019, I also registered for the Executive MBA with UCT. And so where I am with a couple of entrepreneurs is forming a group of companies that have a social imperative to change communities in the energy space and in other spaces that will see our youth and women emancipated in our economies. Excuse me. And in that period, I've been nominated for several awards, and that really is my inspiration to look at how far I have come 22 years later, and how I've transitioned between a creative space and a technical environment, and the passion I have discovered in the energy space to support youth and women. And that is my journey.
And it's a very interesting one, I have to say. Thank you, Berta. I want to ask now Eunice Biditchung to join us. As you've seen, I do not introduce properly our speakers because we like for them to take the opportunity to do so and share also their insights. So, for example, with Berta, we're right now discovering how much she's not only transitioned herself, but also that fact that she's been having to deal with the transitions of others. And Eunice, we're also very keen in hearing from you about your career, which we know it's very long, and it's also been very inspirational.
Thank you, Anna, and hello everyone. And it's a pleasure to be part of this month's WiAP webinar, and a privilege. I would like to start out, first of all, just very quickly talking about my career, which has spanned over 27 years in the power generation industry, both in Ghana and the US, and areas of expertise including power project development and project management, business startup management, obviously strategy development, new business and product development. I've been involved in energy trading and power pool transactions administration, and obviously started out in the integrated power utility operations management, and have had a stint also in organizational restructuring whilst I was there. And more recently developed expertise in contracts development, negotiations, and implementation as they have to do with power projects, and then in governance and board leadership in recent times. So just a little bit about specific roles that I've held. I started out in engineering roles right after my my college education and engineering, both as a bachelor's and a master's in electrical engineering. Went to work for a utility called Northern States Power Company, and that's currently Xcel Energy in the US, and moved up after a short period of time into supervisory and then management roles as you know, I supervise the area responsible for our power purchase transactions and also our power pool operations. And then and that was when I had my first exposure to formal succession planning. And it was as a result of my identification on the succession planning of program of the company that I got to become the manager of the customer service distribution organization. So I moved from generation to distribution because this was a fully integrated power utility at the time, and had responsibility for a pretty large group of employees that were scattered across 5 states where Northern States Power had their service territory. Soon after that, NSP went into merger negotiations with a company called New Century Energies to become Xcel Energy. And I was one of the key employees that was tasked with crafting the resultant organization from that utility merger. I took a decision at the time when the merger went through to leave Xcel Energy and join Cummins Power Generation as a global marketing manager, and focusing on the utility business, and was part of what was known as the energy solutions business that was responsible for selling solutions based on Cummins power generation gensets to large industrial businesses and commercial installations. So after a few years at Cummins, I decided to move back home to Ghana And when I did, I was fortunate to get hired by a company called GCAD Inc. that was involved in power projects development as well as other businesses. Was hired as the head of the infrastructure services, and as a result of that, became the project director of a power project, independent power project development effort. Soon after that, I had the opportunity to become the CEO at inception of an IPP called Senate Energy Limited, and spent about 6.5 years at Senate in developing that organization. Now I'd like to just talk a little bit about some achievements and awards. In 1999, I was awarded a Women of Color and Technology Centurions of Excellence Award. Was very instrumental in having IPPs be appointed to the board of the West African Power Pool in 2017. Senate Energy was the first company that was appointed. I've been a member of the Energy Commission, Ghana's Energy Commission's Technical Committee. And one role I play that I'm very proud of, I'm a member of the Executive Council of the Executive Women Network, which is a network of women business leaders and senior leaders in business in Ghana. And our role is to focus on women in leadership in Ghana. And just to talk about some of the things that I've done. Some of my interests, public speaking at conferences and events. I'm a co-founder of an organization called Accelerating Productivity for Productivity Initiative, which is about a total life cycle skills development. And really through that and my participation in other organizations that are focused on helping people grow over their life cycle, as well as in their businesses and careers. I found my time in Ghana to be very fulfilling and interesting. Since Senate, for the last 1.5 years, I've been working in consulting. And interestingly, I've gotten involved in helping to identify business opportunities for women in the energy sector, as well as targeting women's representation and leadership in the energy sector. So that is what I've been doing most recently. And I'm also a fitness enthusiast. And when I'm not too busy raising my 7-year-old son, I like to be active in the gym and in exercising. So with that, I'll just say thank you to everyone for listening to me, and look forward to the rest of our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Eunice. I think it's been really interesting also to hear from your experience, and also to know that you've been bouncing back from the US now to Ghana, and that there have been so many transitions, not only in terms of companies, but also in terms of cultural backgrounds, which perhaps we'll have an opportunity to further dive into the conversation today. But before we get started, now that we're transitioning into this interview part of the webinar, I would like to ask Berta first, if you can share with us what are those insights that you found out that have driven you throughout your career, and what are your goals and values? I mean, you've done some searching, and we're very interesting to hear from you. What's the drive behind your career?
Sure. It's always a tricky question because the drive changes every 5 years, I think, for me. First, there was a saying that says, you must never be a thief of oxygen. And the drive was, in every place where I am privileged to work, I need to contribute and I need to see tangible results. And so that has driven me hard to ensure that, I design strategies that are related to market conditions and can deliver the results that the business is seeking. 2, that I build credible networks with relevant people where I can also add value within the network. 3 was committing to lifelong learning on whether it's domain expertise or if it's a sectoral understanding. 3 is building a personal brand that ensures that I keep growing my personal network. And 5 now, is ensuring that I am as loyal to those that help me in my growth as I receive loyalty to those that I have contributed towards their growth. And those were really the values that I have carried to work with integrity to ensure that I add value. That is generally as a person. But in terms of choosing a career, I think the light for me was truly in 2017 when I confirmed for myself that I want to make a difference in the energy and power sector on our continent. After realizing and learning for 5 years the impact universal access to energy will have on the continent, ensuring dignity for many communities, especially for women and the youth, who are the most vulnerable sectors of our community.
Thank you, Berta. It's always interesting to hear about people's own values for pushing their careers, because it's not only that we get into the sector and we just, or I would assume, we just kill ourselves working, but there's so much behind us, and that may also help us in these transitions. And with that, I would like to ask Eunice if you can share with us exactly that. What's the drive behind you? The goals and the values that keep you going. I mean, you've been around also as Berta for quite some time, and I'm pretty sure it's useful to go back to these values to keep on moving.
Thank you, Anna. I think for me, for as long as I can remember, I remember even back in college where I was picking my subjects. My passion has always been to participate in power generation in Ghana and in the West African region at large. So that was the first thing. And then the second one, while I was away, was to have roles or to work for organizations that would help facilitate my move back to Ghana, because I ultimately wanted to be back home making a difference in my country, as well as being close to family. And then lastly, it was about roles where I would have increasing responsibility and relevance to the business and to the results and the success of the business. So very simply, I think those were the 3. And as far as values, for me, it's always been to, I've always believed in this, that, you should bloom where you're planted, so sometimes you may have a particular job that seems like it's a small thing, but you never know what that might lead to. One of my other quotes is to never despise the day of small beginnings, because you just never know where that might take you. And that definitely was my experience when I moved back to Ghana and had a job that seemed like, based on what I'd been doing before I moved back, was very minimal. But because of my work there, I was recognized and given very big assignments after that, which led to, the work that I've done in the last, I'd say 10 or so years here in Ghana. So thank you.
Thanks, Anna. What a lovely reflection. I'm sure I'm not going to be able to quote you properly, but it's beautiful to see how not to minimize that one opportunity that day that's coming your way and make the best out of it. I do think that resonates with quite a lot of us. And I want to keep you on the line to ask you about this process of transitions in your professional life. I hope you don't mind sharing with us at what moment or moments as you've moved from different positions. When have you perceived this change as a major transition, and why? Is it an impact at emotional level, a practical level? How do you measure that and call something a transition and deal with it?
Anna, is this from you or Eunice?
I was hoping Eunice would take it first.
Okay. Yeah, I'll talk about my most recent transition, which really has been a true transition, which was my move from being the CEO of Senate Energy to doing consulting work now. I would say that has been the most major transition for me out of all the different career transitions. Physically, yes, I no longer was the CEO of the company, and that I had, worked on since day one for 6.5 years. I mean, I ate, breathed, lived, Senate Energy because I was the first employee and, set up everything. And then, at the time I left, it was a smaller corporate organization, but we were very active in the power sector, not only in Ghana, but in the West African region, and were recognized as, as a company to be, to be considered or that had value in the sector. And so, really thinking about how I was going to reinvent myself and to transition from that role into a consulting role where you are more, where it's more advising others and, trying to see how you can best support your clients and what they're doing, so that emotionally was a bit different because I missed my staff, when I moved, and now moving from working more with people where you're working with people, but most of your productive time is usually, on a one-on-one basis. So those were things that I experienced and things that helped me to deal with the transition. I leveraged my past skills, but also realized that I needed to develop some new ones as a consultant, and it's been a good learning experience, sometimes challenging, and also I needed to develop a new support network whilst I still reached out and relied some on my old support network. And also, just to have the mindset that, it's not business as usual. Some of the things that really carried me, that, that really projected me, to the forefront of the sector now, are a bit different. I'm now working more with women in energy and trying to promote women's roles in the energy sector, and to realize that is really valuable work, just as valuable as setting up the operations of an independent power producing company, and that this is something that's very needed, and that there's a social aspect to that I know will make a difference for time to come, for years and generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Eunice. It's a lot of information in your answer, and I appreciate it. And what I'm extracting right now, but we can even dissect more later, is the emotions of leaving your team behind, but also the skills to go and create a different network to help you cope with this new situation and adapt yourself also to these new circumstances. And now I wanted to use that as perhaps a lead to ask Berta to come into the conversation and also help with us to reflect a little bit on her own transitions, and when she's considered, that there is this transition that's come up. How does it affect you positively, negatively, and what do you do with coping with this emotions and these changes?
Sure. I liked a lot what Eunice said about humble beginnings. I can't quite recall, rephrase what she said, but it's a very profound statement because it's the most difficult thing to do when you move from one role to another role that is not as big as the previous role. Just moving on to my contribution to the specific topic. When I transitioned and I sold a part of my business to an engineering firm, I had spent 6 years carrying the business risk on my own. I was the custodian of the strategy, the custodian of the financial health of the business, the custodian of the business development, and the health of the business development pipeline. I fought with the clients. I made up with the clients. I fought with the staff. I made up with the staff. I trained the staff. I carried a lot on my shoulders, and the transition was very attractive to join 10 other partners of a large consulting firm to share the risk. What was difficult was to forego autonomy, complete autonomy and complete ownership of decision-making rights. And that was very difficult. Retail Consulting was a company that I created from nothing, and it had a portfolio of clients. And so the transaction was valuable, but the transition was quite difficult also because I was transitioning to a totally different domain. So the learning curve was very steep, and mentally and emotionally was very, and having to recreate and build a personal brand afresh in a new sector was quite a feat. But I also enjoyed the challenge, and I used every skill that I had gained and every advice I'd ever given my clients on how to position themselves in the market to reposition myself in the energy sector. And I think the brand that I have since built between 2012 and now speaks to the success that I have achieved. The next transition that was difficult, and I'm not quite sure if I even managed to handle that right or correctly or succeeded in handling it, was moving from being a managing director of a large consulting firm to heading up a segment within a much bigger, much complex organization that had global hubs, and you never really had authority on anything. And that lack of authority was a very difficult adjustment for me. In fact, I don't think I ever adjusted because I couldn't wrap my head around it. And so transition affects, for me, there's the mental shift where you make the decision to transition. There's the emotional shift where you deal with what you have lost and you accept what you have gained, and you use the competences that you have to make it work. And that is always a struggle, and it helps to have coaches and mentors that can help you navigate the complexity of your own emotions and mental turmoil versus your ability to be productive. And now, having transitioned again into a nonprofit organization that I have founded, I'm finding that I have come full circle in my journey, and I know the benefits and the risks, and I am working a lot more with people in areas that I know are not my strong points. So that I can complement my weaknesses with other people's strengths, and together we can achieve better results. And I'm finding that there are a lot of women in South Africa and in Southern Africa in general, in fact, in all parts of Africa, just like Eunice's testimony, who are devoted and committed to seeing gender mainstreaming in the sector. And it's a very exciting space to finally have the autonomy to do the things that I'm passionate about. And that is my contribution to how I've handled transition and where I feel I have failed in transitioning completely to be totally successful, if we can put it that way, but still having achieved something out of that experience.
Thank you, Berta. I appreciate that. I don't think if you allow me to be politically correct, but I don't think you've fails in transitioning, I do think that it's quite interesting to see that one can recognize that there is not a perfect fit and time to move somewhere else. So that's also, I guess, a learning point for all of us in terms of feeling where we want to be. And in that sense of feeling where we want to be and growing our careers, I want to take advantage of the fact that you're still on the line, Berta, and ask you about legacy. Because when we are transitioning and when I hear both you and Eunice about all the companies and the efforts that you've brought from the ground up, I wonder how you look at that in terms of your legacy, how you build it, and if you are concerned or not with your career legacy.
You know, when I took my sabbatical in 2017, and during my stay at ABB, battling with the fit and wanting to continue having an impact in the industry, I had to ask myself some really hard questions. What is it that I want to wake up for? What is it that will get me out of bed? What is it that will make me read a 170-page report, not once, again and again, and synthesize it into insights that I can use? What is it that will make me reach out to other like-minded women on the continent? And when I say like-minded, I'm being very cautious. I don't mean people who think like me, but people who want to achieve the same goals that I want to achieve. And I then realized, you know, I choose to support women entrepreneurs in energy and power to participate truly in the main value chain of our energy sector and our power sector on the continent. And that is the legacy that I want to build, to collaborate with organizations that are pursuing the same gender mainstreaming goal, such that we can have a directory showcasing women in energy and power in Africa, telling African stories of entrepreneurship and innovation with authenticity and the elegance that we as Africans want to be known for. And that is the legacy that I want to build. And so I took a very brave step to leave full-time employment and to work within my NPO to drive this legacy, because I believe in it, and it's something that it's a mission that is achievable, and I want to be part of that success in years to come.
Thank you. Very inspirational. And I want to ask Eunice a question along the same lines. As Eunice, when you look at your career, I wonder how or if you started questioning about what could be your legacy, and if you've seen changes in terms of looking back to that question and assessing the legacy that you want to leave behind in your career.
It was very interesting listening to Bertha, because I sort of felt like I could, you know, I was sort of stepping in her shoes, though in a very small way, what she's lived and done in on a much bigger scale. You know, throughout my career, I mean, even though I'd worked with women and, you know, had female friends and so on, the emphasis on supporting women to achieve leadership or to, you know, achieve the things that they can, especially in this sector, wasn't as much on the forefront of my thinking. You know, I was more focused in, you know, getting the business results and making sure that we did it well, you know, and sometimes I think some of the softer skills that were needed, you know, sometimes when you're working with women, I didn't tend to think about as much. And sometimes I would be reminded by a well-meaning employee, maybe my HR director or someone that perhaps I could have done things just a little differently. But now in my consulting role, I mean, that is what that is what I've gotten involved in. And now, you know, I'm coming to appreciate, you know, the role of civil society organizations, you know, the importance of making sure that women can thrive in this sector, and the importance of us being able to achieve and to showcase, our achievements in the energy sector. And so, back to your question there about the legacy, I see that now as something that I want to accomplish. And I think it's interesting that Bertha and I happen to be on this webinar together, because I think there's a lot that we can learn from her by what we're trying to do here in Ghana, where it's not only looking at women who are employed in the institutions, but also those who have started entrepreneurial ventures and moving more into mainstream, entrepreneurial organizations in the power sector. So I think that for me, that's the legacy that I see myself, wanting to build and working on for myself at this stage.
Thank you, Eunice. And I can see that you're now, also in this role of supporting women and entrepreneurship. But I cannot forget when you started the conversation talking about yourself and how your drive was to go back to Ghana and to be in this sector and make it thrive. And I don't want to let that image go, because I want to talk now about succession, or ask you to please help us discuss the topic of succession. And either in that role or in your current role, the question is how have you interpreted succession planning? Have you thought about it? Have you thought about a successor? And if so, what kind of strategies have you set into place to identify that other person that you would entrust this new challenge or this new position to?
Yes, I think primarily in the roles that I've held since moving back to Ghana, I think it became especially important to have that when I was the CEO of Senate Energy. And the way I see succession, especially for smaller organizations, I mean, I think you can have it where it's not formal, but it still needs to be very deliberate, okay, as to, who can step in your shoes someday when, you look at, new opportunities. And for me, it became important as I started to look at, what do I want to do next? Where do I want to go, from here? So in some cases, people think, well, you're a CEO, you've reached the ultimate, role that you could have. But for me, it was of a CEO of a smaller company. And so I'd set my sights on being able to be part of a larger organization and be able to, rise there as well. So for the succession planning, for me, first of all, some of the values that were important for me in identifying and developing, the person that could step in my shoes was that, I looked for someone who obviously was trustworthy and capable, who was also committed to the business and its success as much as I was, had similar values and work ethics. And I developed them by involving them in key decision making, and then having them act for me whenever I was away. And then also, sending them out on important assignments in my place to represent the company. And I'm pretty pleased to say that when I left Senate Energy, and at the time, it wasn't a planned departure. It happened pretty abruptly. I was planning to leave, but it happened sooner than I had originally envisioned. Everything didn't stop. The business continued because I had groomed, the right person to step in and continue the work. And in fact, it was something that the board, mentioned to my credit that, so often, especially in smaller organizations, you could see that happen. But in this case, work is continuing, and they're continuing to grow and make meaningful contributions to the power generation sector in the country. So I hope I've answered your question, and if not, please let me know, and I can come back to it. Thanks.
Thanks, Eunice. And yes, I think you've definitely answered the question. Um, I'm starting to get a little conscious of the time, but Bertha, I'm going to ask you perhaps to help us with the same question first, before
Mhm.
throwing one question to both of you that we have received from our audience. Um, so if you can reflect on this process of succession planning, and share with us whether you've done this consciously, or and if you've done it, what has worked for you in terms of identifying a successor?
Sure. So identifying a successor for a small emerging company is always difficult because as the founder of the business, you are the custodian of everything. And in order to in order to have a successor, even if you identify them to bring them on board, firstly, the company needs to be financially stable and it needs to be generating enough revenues to cover the critical roles that you have identified as needing a successor or for yourself. So if you are the CEO and you're looking for a successor, they don't come cheap in the market, and especially to join a small emerging firm and the risks that are associated with a small emerging firm based on its life cycle, based on whether there's an incumbent customer or not, or the health of the pipeline. And so it's always about identifying an individual that either has a similar business that you can merge and join forces and work together. And that has always been a theory in my head. I have not had the opportunity to implement that strategy. However, as I was departing at E.ON, I identified a successor myself. I am a firm believer of knowing when it is time to step aside and let fresh new ideas and leadership competences take the seat. And when I realized that I had tried and we had executed every strategy possible within the core team that we had, and we were not getting the results, the turnaround results that we wanted to achieve. We then identified people that were better skilled than us, or we perceived them to be better skilled than us, and we conducted the interviews and we looked for a match between the executive team and what the business required in its tumultuous time. And that was presented to the board. Unfortunately, it was not executed. So that's the strategy that I think works to match the complexity that exists within a business to the competencies of the person that is outside of the business or within the business. With small businesses, succession planning is a requirement, is necessary, but it's very difficult. It depends on where in the life cycle of the business is.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions that have been coming in. So I'm just going to throw it to the two of you. And then, I mean, if you can take it as you feel. The first one, and I'm going to read it, is not necessarily in transition, but I think it's an interesting one. It reads as such. I have joined the energy access space recently, and something that keeps being raised is the lack of visibility of African-led institutions. As someone who has been in the energy space, how do you think we can solve that?
That is a very, it's true. Whoever asked that question has made a very good observation. There are emerging small African women-led companies, but energy is a very difficult sector to participate in. It's capital intensive, and access to finance generally is difficult, even more difficult for women in Africa. Because of how our financial institutions are structured and the lack of collateral for most African women on the continent for large-scale finance, for large-scale energy projects. So how we can resolve that and how we plan to resolve that at WiAP, African Women in Energy and Power, is to build a directory of credible women entrepreneurs on the continent, so that global firms that want to continue to trade their technology on our continent and want to help us transform the energy sector have a repository to go to, where they can find credible women entrepreneurs in Ghana, in Zambia, in South Africa, Lesotho, Swaziland, any country on the continent. And they can use those entrepreneurs as channel partners for their technology, or even partners for independent power production companies.
Thank you. Eunice, I wonder if you also want to contribute to this question.
Yeah, I think our experiences are pretty similar, Bertha and myself, here in Ghana. I mean, that is one of the main reasons why I didn't touch on this in my introduction, but I've been working with the formation of a group called Women in Energy Ghana. And in fact, we're looking at collaborating with other women in energy groups across the continent and overseas as well. But this is one of the key areas that we plan to focus on, where we're hoping to help drive policy and to have discussions around how we help women become more involved in businesses and energy. The challenges are really around the same reasons that Bertha identified. And it was interesting for me that one of the first things I did after I left Senate Energy was to be involved in an ECRI project, which is ECRI is the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, on a feasibility study around increasing the participation of women businesses in the energy sector. In fact, there's a presentation being given right now by the ECRI group as we speak on this webinar, and so I couldn't participate in the results, in sharing the results of the consultancy work that's being done. But it recognizes all these facets, and the goal is to help identify specific projects in across 4 countries in the West African sub-region. In Ghana, the focus is on helping a woman develop a solar business, a large-scale solar business, and helping put together the necessary project information and feasibility studies and so on that would help these women business owners qualify for financing from the relevant banks and development financing institutions. So at the end of this whole project will be to present these projects from Nigeria, from Ghana, from Cote d'Ivoire, and from Senegal to financial institutions, and hopefully help them identify these women that can then raise the financing and then go on to develop these projects. So, I mean, that's one of the things that we're hoping that we can replicate within the sub-region. But as Bertha has mentioned, and I think the directory is an excellent idea, is to recognize that we need to be very deliberate in helping women and women businesses on the continent have more of a presence and a participation in this very lucrative energy sector. Because when you give us responsibilities, we do very well. I mean, I think the the evidence is there, and I won't go into women on boards and leadership right now, but maybe that's a topic for a future webinar to discuss. Thank you.
Thank you, Eunice, and thank you for choosing us over ECOWAS. I had no idea. I think we feel very honored about your choice. I know we're on the hour, but I really don't want to leave without this one question from one of our participants. Eunice, I'm going to take advantage of the fact that you're still online to pose it first to you. I'm going to ask you to keep it short, and the same to Bertha. I'm going to read the question. It says, what were your fears at the point of transition? For example, was it going back to school, moving jobs, starting a new company? I mean, it's almost like starting all over again. What were your fears at the time?
Okay, I mean, for me, my biggest fear was that, that I would not do a good job of this, big responsibility that had been given me. I mean, I was the only female CEO of a utility or a power-related entity in Ghana. I could not afford to fail. And so I did everything that I could to make sure that I'd be successful. And at times that meant, taking some ribbing from the guys who felt they could speak on my behalf and so on. But you can imagine just mentally, emotionally, everything. And my family, fortunately for me, understood. I had to give it my all. And I think the results speak for themselves. Thank you.
Thank you. So the responsibility of being up front and center at this large company was definitely scary. And Berta, for you, what was the biggest fear point in your transitioning between
My biggest fear was that I would not find, as a non-engineer transitioning into the energy sector, a totally technical space, my fear was how I was going to craft space for me to add value. So I spent lots of nights worrying about the fact that I'm not an engineer until I stopped myself and I thought, what engineers don't have, I have in multitudes. I am an entrepreneur, I am a business strategist, I am driven, and there is nothing that is written that I cannot synthesize and understand. And as soon as I went over that hurdle, my next fear was, will I succeed? And so I learned to, and I'm still learning, that success is not a destination. It's something that you can plan with a clear mind that says it might happen, it might not happen. Either way, it's not the end of the world. It's the end of the world when you stop trying. And that's my position on fear. Thank you.
Thank you. I think you're both very courageous women. And unfortunately, we've come to the end of our webinar. As you know, it's traditional of us to ask our panelists to give us a takeaway message. So I'm going to ask you, Bertha, as I have you on the line now, to give us perhaps your two sentences on final tips and advices to our audience on career transitioning or succession. What do we need to remember after this webinar, you think?
What we need to remember is succession planning may be perceived as a very complex mission for large corporates, but small businesses play a very profound role in our economies in creating employment and driving microeconomies. Their survival depends on succession planning. So learn about it, read about it, and find your own way of having a successor.
Thank you. And Eunice, the same to you. What are those tips, advice, that one thought in terms of career transitioning and succession planning that you think we have to remember?
I think with career transitions, to take each new step as sort of a doorway to, immense opportunities that we may not have thought about or considered before. And so just to see, each transition really as a stepping stone to, to the future and to new opportunities that are waiting to be opened up to you and that are, that are there for you to discover. So that is what I would say about transitions. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank you, the two of you, for being part of our conversation today. As we start to round up today's webinar, just to tell everyone to remember that career transition is not necessarily this leap, but it can be a series of steps in which we deal not only with the practical issues, but also with the emotional ones. To me, and I'm very sure that also for you, our network members, it's been an honor to listen to both Berta and Eunice, to learn about their experiences and to start thinking again, about the future. Women in African Power is now also looking for new topics for webinars. So I would like to ask everyone to stay tuned to our monthly updates so that we can share with you what are the next steps in terms of the content and the series. I want to thank our panelists and our participants for their attention, Power Africa for the support that they provide to the network. And I won't leave without reminding you that the video, the recording of this webinar is going to be made available together with the presentations, the resource on defining transition and succession, as well as a series of exercises that you can use if you're interested in exercising how to transition or how to look for a successor. And with that, I want to give you to thank you and say I wish you a good rest of the day. It's been a pleasure to be with you today, and we're looking forward to meeting you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you.